Hi folks, HR Funk here. For a while now, I have been conducting product testing for a China-based company called Nutrek Optics. Nutrek has been sending me various products that they have manufactured, and I have been testing them and then sending the test results back so they can improve their products so that hopefully by the time they're used by any of you, they are working properly and you don't experience any problems. And what I have with me here today is the second Nutrek Optics product that I'm going to be telling you about. This is the Nutrek Optics Rovac. The Rovac is an enclosed emitter red dot style optic intended mainly for use on handguns, but it could also be used on long guns as an auxiliary sight. And this is the second Rovac that I have received for testing. The first one that I got, I tested. There were some issues. I sent the results back, and now the suggestions I made with regard to that first one have been incorporated into the new version. And in this video, I'm going to tell you about that initial testing. I'll tell you about the performance I'm now getting from the Rovac, and in the end, you can decide whether or not you think the Nutrek Rovac might be right for your shooting needs. So here we go. Here's our first up-close look at the Nutrek Rovac, and as I said, it is an enclosed emitter style red dot optic. There are two different versions of the Rovac. This one has a 3-minute of angle dot. There is also a version with a 6-minute of angle dot. In terms of dimension, everything was in metric measurements, so I'm going to do a quick measurement here. The Rovac has an overall length of about 1.5 inches, a height with its mounting plate of, looks like just shy of 1.25 inches, and a width of just about 1.25 inches, including the battery compartment on the opposite side. The Rovac has a 20 by 16 millimeter objective lens. It also features a dual power source. On the side here, you can see the side-mounted battery compartment, which stores a 1632 battery, and on top you see a solar panel. And the Rovac is capable of being used without the battery installed. I have tested that outside under bright sunlight. There is sufficient power from the solar cell in order to illuminate the reticle, but the instant you go outside of direct sunlight, you lose the reticle. So keep that in mind. It will illuminate the reticle if necessary, but it is not a permanent solution. It does not recharge the battery or anything like that. You do have to be in direct sunlight in order to get that reticle to work without the battery or with a battery that is already depleted. Here are the side-mounted controls for the Rovac, which consist of one up and one down arrow button. These are used to turn the Rovac on simply by pressing and releasing either the up or the down arrow. To power the sight down, press and hold either the up or the down arrow button, and that will turn it off. The Rovac also features shake awake. If it is placed in a position where it senses no movement for a period of 3 minutes, the reticle will power down, but the sight is still on. As soon as the sight senses any movement, it comes back on. Now, I did notice with the first Rovac that I had for testing, eventually, after it was exposed to my endurance testing protocol, that instant on or shake awake started to become a bit sluggish, but the sight did continue to work, and I will explain as I go what all I did to that sight, and the very fact that it was working at all by the time I got done was actually kind of impressive. Here's a look at the right side of the Rovac with the battery compartment and the windage and elevation adjustment screws. The Rovac features 45 minutes of angle of adjustment for both windage and elevation from the mechanical center of the optic, meaning that you get half of that up and half of that down and half right and half left, but the total movement is 45 minutes of angle for each. There is a look at the 3-minute of angle dot through the Rovac, and as always I have to say that when you see this with your actual eye, the dot looks much better than it does when I have a camera trying to record through the optic. The Rovac has 9 brightness settings, the lowest 2 of which are night vision compatible. It's also rated as having a battery life of 8,000 hours at a medium brightness setting, but that's going to be impacted somewhat by how often it's moved, because once again, the reticle sleeps when it senses no movement for a period of 3 minutes and then comes back on later on when it does sense movement. So the battery life is always an estimate. It is never etched in stone. Here I've changed the camera position slightly just to demonstrate that you can't really get a co-witness with your mechanical sights when the Rovac is installed. At least I can't with the Ruger RXM. The Rovac features the use of a mounting plate that I'll show you here momentarily, which is convenient because it allows the Rovac to be mounted on either a slide that is cut for an RMR or the smaller RMSC footprint optic, but it also raises the Rovac somewhat, as you can see, and as a result of that, I am not able to get that co-witness. The plate that is currently being used to secure the Rovac to the RXM is the one that is appropriate for RMR style optics. The one that I have here is the one that would be used for an RMSC optic, and as you can see, the plate itself is what is actually attached to the slide, and then the Rovac is secured to the plate. So it's a nice system because it allows the Rovac to be mounted to different types of firearms with different mounting profiles. It also comes, the Rovac I mean, with a selection of screws that may or may not work with your specific handgun, depending upon the type of screw that is required, the thread pitch, etc. I actually had to play musical screws a little bit to come up with those that would be appropriate for this particular mounting plate and the RXM. The Rovac has a waterproof rating of IPX7, meaning it should be submersible with no problems for the optic. Also, it has been tested to 5,000 Gs to establish its shockproof rating. Along with the mounting plates and screws that I mentioned a moment ago, the Rovac comes with a lens cleaning cloth, an instruction pamphlet, and also a tool for both mounting and adjusting it. And I almost forgot one other item that comes with it is a rubber protective cover. So as I said, this is the second Rovac that I've received for testing, and both the initial one that I received and this one have proven themselves capable of allowing me to achieve pretty respectable accuracy with the Ruger RXM. I'll flash some groups up on the screen here from my initial testing with the first Rovac, and this has now been several weeks ago, maybe a month or so ago. And these groups were fired at a distance of 25 yards from a bench off a rest. And these are some groups that I fired just a couple of days ago while I was zeroing this particular Rovac to the RXM. These, once again, are from a distance of 25 yards, fired from a bench off of a rest. This is a 5-shot group, even though you can only see 4 shot holes because this one has 2 shots through the same exact hole. I pulled one shot a little bit low. I'm sure that was me because this is the group that I fired right before that. Before I made a sight correction, I actually think I went 2 clicks to the left after this, and that was a little bit too far, so I came back 1 after I fired this one. But I didn't measure that, but that's probably a little over an inch, center to center, so not bad from 25 yards. I also shot that first Rovac as well as this one through several defensive drills. I did some shooting on steel plates with it. I did some shooting at a half-size IPSC silhouette from a distance of 25 yards. I'll show you all that footage right now. On the various occasions I was working with both Rovac sights at the range, I only had one camera with me. So as you watch this footage, you're going to notice that I'm showing clips of me shooting and then alternating with photos of the target after I fired those shots so you can see where they impacted. Here's a little of the steel plate shooting from a distance of 10 yards. Another defensive drill, and I'll flash the target up here so you can see the results of this shooting. All those shots are on the heart of the target, by the way, from a distance of 7 yards. And I'll finish things up here with a little bit of 25-yard shooting on a half-size IPSC silhouette. So in general terms, for what I would call normal use, the Rovac performed very, very well. This is the point where with the first Rovac, I started into my endurance testing. And you may have seen this with other optics. The first step was to place it into my freezer to simulate extreme cold temperatures, and I left it in there for a time period of 36 hours. And when I pulled it out, it was still working just fine. After removing it from my freezer, I walked over here to the shop and immediately dropped that sight into a glass that was filled with water that was over 140 degrees Fahrenheit. So it was an extreme shift going from an air environment that was around 0 degrees Fahrenheit in the freezer to a liquid environment that now was over 140 degrees. And I left it submerged in that hot water for a time period of 1 hour. After an hour had transpired, I removed the Rovac from the water, and it was still working and appeared to be working just fine. There were no issues that I could tell just by looking at it. And that in and of itself is pretty impressive. I've performed that test several times where I've gone from the air environment around zero to the liquid environment of 140 degrees or so. And there have been some optics that have been rendered completely inoperative when I have subjected them to that test. The Rovac, to its credit, was still working just fine. At that point, it was time to go back to the range. When I got to the range, I again set up at a distance of 25 yards, shooting from the bench, and what I wanted to see is if the Rovac had maintained its zero after being subjected to the extreme cold temperature for a period of 36 hours, then experiencing the thermal shock of going directly into the hot water. And when I started to fire, what I noticed was the zero had shifted somewhat. I was now hitting about 4 inches to the right of where I had previously zeroed the handgun. Now, to put this into perspective, 4 inches at 25 yards is a shift of about 16 minutes of angle. And part of the reason I conduct my shooting from that distance is because it's going to show a deviation faster, and maybe I should say easier, than if I tried to do the same type of a test from a closer distance. Had I shot this from 7 yards, this would have been less than 1¼ inches of deviation, and I don't know if that would even be noticed if I was firing defensive drills or firing at plates or whatever. At 10 yards, it would have been just over 1.5 inches or thereabouts. 15 yards, I believe about 2¼ inches, something like that. So I don't want to overemphasize this deviation, but I do want to note it. A lot of this depends on the distance from which somebody is expecting to shoot and the degree of accuracy they are wanting to get from their optic and their firearm. If someone was using this sight and they were shooting from close distances, like I said, 7 yards, 10 yards, whatever, it is entirely possible that they may not have even noticed this deviation. But for me, at 25 yards, and certainly beyond that, it was something that I picked up on. Whether or not that's going to matter to you depends a lot on the type of shooting you're going to be doing. Now it was time for a drop test. At the range, I dropped the pistol, trying to get it to land on the Rovac from a distance of about 1 yard, give or take, onto a solid wooden tabletop, and I was hoping that it would direct all of the impact onto the Rovac to see how it was going to stand up to that type of an impact. When I completed the drop testing, the Rovac was still working properly. I could still see the reticle was illuminated, but I noticed quickly that it was beginning to fog internally. And what happened, I think, is that there was water retained inside of the sight somewhere from the submersion test. And when I subjected the sight to that drop test and the impact, it allowed water to make its way into the interior of the optic. Now the optic was still working, so keep that in mind. That in and of itself is saying something for it, but I was getting internal fogging, which was making it a little bit more difficult to see through the optic. I did continue to shoot it, and it did continue to keep shots on target at a distance of 25 yards. I was not able to hold the tight groups that I had before, partly because my view through the optic was obscured by the internal fogging. But at the end, the Rovac continued to work, it continued to perform. It was just not performing at the optimum level that it was when I first took it out of the box. A little bit later, I removed the battery from the Rovac, and when I did that, I could see that there was water inside the battery compartment, both on the inside of the cover itself and down into the compartment, and I think that was what allowed water to get inside the optic when I subjected it to the drop test. When I removed the battery, however, I did test it in the direct sunlight out at the range, and it was still illuminating the optic with just the solar panel, so that was still working. So push come to shove, in a very bad situation, if the sight had been exposed to submersion or what have you, and impacts or whatever, and it was starting to fog internally, Even so, it was still capable of being used and still capable of putting effective shots on target. Once again, you can make up your own mind whether or not you think that's going to be an issue for you or something you're not that concerned about. Based on the information I sent back to Nutrek, they improved the water seal around the battery compartment. So hopefully that should alleviate the possibility of anyone experiencing the problem that I had with the first site if you purchase one of these, since that improvement has been made. After my experience with that first Rovac and now the second one that I've been testing for a while, I feel comfortable in saying for general shooting purposes, especially if you're going to be out in inclement weather and it might be exposed to just normal rain or snow or temperature variations, I think the Rovac is fine. For match shooting, particularly informal match shooting, maybe even hunting, I think it would work okay. For home defense, where it's going to be mostly inside of your home in a stable environment, I think it would be perfectly fine. I would hesitate to use the Rovac for any serious purposes. For duty use by law enforcement officers, for military use, or what have you, I would not go with the Rovac. Now, this is a value-priced optic. It's retailing for under $250, which puts it on the lower tier price-wise of a lot of the enclosed emitter style optics. So if you're looking for an affordable optic that's going to be used for light to medium duty, you can take a look at the Rovac and see what you think. But as I said, I don't think I would use it for anything where it would be subjected to extreme conditions like law enforcement and military use. So there you go, folks. That's my review of the Nutrek Optics Rovac. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions or comments about this video, as always, make sure you forward those to me. Remember, stop by my website, hrfunk.com. Check out the news and information page to see all the latest things that are going on with me and the channel. And go by the products page. A lot of the products that I've reviewed here on the channel have links to the manufacturers on that page, and there's some information beneath some of those links that'll save you some money if you decide to make a purchase. See you next time, folks. And until then, good shooting. Bye-bye.